Story number 1. Whispers beneath the ice. Winter in Lapland was unforgiving. The landscape transformed into a vast, silent expanse of white, where the biting cold gnawed at your skin and the night stretched endlessly. I had come to this remote Finnish village seeking solitude and a break from the chaos of city life. As an aspiring writer, I believed the isolation would provide the perfect backdrop for inspiration. Little did I know, the ice-covered lake held secrets far darker than I could have ever imagined. The villagers spoke of the lake, Jarvilumi, a frozen mirror reflecting the stark beauty of the Arctic winter. But beneath its serene surface lay stories whispered in hushed tones around crackling fires. Tales of faint calls echoing from beneath the thick ice during the coldest nights, and of ghostly hands reaching out to those brave, or foolish, enough to venture onto its frozen expanse. On my second evening in the village, as the temperature plummeted to record lows, I decided to visit the lake. Armed with my notebook, a sturdy pair of boots, and a sense of curiosity that outweighed my apprehension, I made my way through the snow-laden forest. The moon hung low, its pale light casting long shadows that danced eerily on the ground. The only sounds were the crunch of my footsteps and the whispering wind, until I reached the edge of Jarvilumi. The ice was thick, a solid barrier that shimmered under the moonlight. Locals avoided the lake at night, especially during the deepest part of winter, when the cold was relentless and the calls from below were said to grow louder. But I was not one to eat superstitions. I set up a small camp near the shoreline, hoping to capture the essence of the lake's solitude and perhaps uncover the truth behind the legends. Hours passed in tranquil silence, the night deepening around me. My breath formed visible puffs in the frigid air as I scribbled notes, the rhythmic tapping of my pen the only disturbance. As midnight approached, the temperature dropped further, and an unnatural stillness settled over the lake. It was then that I heard it, a faint, sorrowful whispering emanating from beneath the ice. At first, I dismissed it as the wind playing tricks on my mind. But the whispers grew clearer, morphing into indistinct words that sent a chill down my spine. My curiosity piqued, I grabbed my flashlight and cautiously approached the ice's edge. The beam of light pierced the darkness, illuminating the frozen surface that stretched out before me. Suddenly, the ice beneath my feet groaned ominously. I froze, heart pounding, as I stared into the darkness below. Then, amidst the shadows, I saw them, ghostly hands, pale and translucent, reaching upward as if desperate to escape the icy grip of the lake. My mind raced, recalling the stories of fishermen who had seen similar apparitions, their lives lost to the merciless winter. Panic set in as the whispers grew louder, forming coherent pleas for help. "Save us," they seemed to cry, their voices laced with agony and desperation. I stumbled backward, tripping over a hidden ice protrusion, and fell to the ground. My flashlight skittered across the ice, the beam dancing wildly as I scrambled to my feet. That's when I saw her, a figure clad in a flowing white gown, her face obscured by a veil of ice crystals. She stood at the far end of the shoreline, her presence both haunting and ethereal. Her eyes, visible beneath the veil, burned with an otherworldly light, filled with sorrow and rage. The air around her was frigid, and a palpable sense of despair hung heavy in the atmosphere. "Why are you here?" I managed to stammer, my voice barely a whisper against the howling wind. She extended a hand, her fingers long and delicate, reaching out toward me. "They are waiting," she intoned, her voice echoing across the frozen lake. "Join us." Fear surged through me, mingling with a strange compulsion that made it difficult to look away. The ghostly hands below continued their futile attempts to break free, their silent cries for salvation resonating deep within my soul. I took a step back, my instincts screaming to flee, but my body felt rooted to the spot. Suddenly, the ice beneath me cracked, sending a cascade of shattered fragments skittering across the surface. The whispers turned into anguished wails, and the temperature plummeted further, the cold seeping into my bones. I turned to run, but the figure in white was already moving, gliding gracefully toward me with an unnatural speed. "Please," she whispered, her voice a haunting melody that tugged at my very being. "Help us." Desperation clawed at me as I tried to find my footing, the ground slippery with hidden ice. My mind raced, recalling the tales of those who had invited spirits into their lives, only to be consumed by their sorrow and vengeance. I had to escape, to leave this forsaken place and never return. As I turned to flee, I felt an icy grip around my ankle, pulling me toward the lake's edge. My scream was swallowed by the howling storm, the wind tearing at my clothes and hair. I struggled against the invisible force, my heart hammering in my chest as the ghostly hands reached out once more, their touch cold and unforgiving. In a final, desperate bid for freedom, I tore my foot free and sprinted into the forest, the figure in white and the anguished spirits chasing me through the snow. Branches whipped against my face, and the biting cold threatened to sap the strength from my limbs. I could feel their presence, their sorrow pressing in on me, urging me to join them in their eternal winter. Just as exhaustion began to take hold, I burst through the tree line and into the safety of the village lights. Gasping for breath, I collapsed onto the snow-covered ground, the storm gradually abating around me. The whispers had faded, leaving behind only the sound of my ragged breaths and the distant call of an owl. I made my way back to my cabin, the memory of that night seared into my mind. The story of Jarvilumi had taken on a new, personal meaning, a reminder of the thin veil that separates the living from the dead, and the consequences of disturbing those who dwell in the shadows of winter. In the weeks that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, the lingering presence of the spirits haunting my every thought. I poured my experience into my writing, crafting a tale that would hopefully honor the restless souls and warn others of the dangers that lie beneath the ice. The villagers listened with a mixture of fear and respect, their belief in the legends now reaffirmed by my first-hand account. But some nights, when the temperature drops and the snow falls thick once more, I swear I can hear the faint whispers beneath my window, a sorrowful reminder of the night I encountered the bride and the lost souls of Jarvilumi. And though I strive to move forward, the echoes of that frozen lake linger, a chilling testament to the eternal winter that resides within the hearts of those who cannot be saved. Story number 2. The Stranger in the Snowstorm. Winter in the remote villages of northern Norway was both a blessing and a curse. The serene beauty of snow-covered landscapes was matched only by the biting cold that seemed to seep into your very bones. I had grown up hearing the old legends whispered around the hearth, tales of spirits and shadows that roamed the endless white. But nothing could have prepared me for the night the stranger appeared. My family lived in a modest cabin on the outskirts of Skarstad, a village so small it often went unnoticed on maps. My father was a lumberjack, my mother a skilled weaver, and I, Eric, was the eldest of 3 children. Life was simple, dictated by the rhythm of the seasons and the demands of survival in the harsh Nordic wilderness. It was the dead of winter, and a fierce snowstorm had descended upon us with little warning. The wind howled like a beast outside, and snowflakes whipped against the windows with relentless fury. We were all bundled up inside, the warmth of the fire providing a stark contrast to the chaos outside. My younger siblings, Lars and Ingrid, were asleep, their breaths visible in the frigid air. Around midnight, the storm seemed to intensify, as if the heavens themselves were angry. The power flickered and went out, plunging us into darkness illuminated only by the fireplace's glow. My father lit extra candles, their flickering flames casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. It was then that I heard it, a soft knock at the door, barely audible over the roar of the storm. My father exchanged a concerned glance with my mother before rising to investigate. He opened the door to reveal a man cloaked in black, his face obscured by the shadows of his heavy hood. His presence was unsettling, an unnatural stillness about him despite the tempest raging outside. "Can I help you?" my father called out, his voice steady but tinged with caution. The stranger didn't reply. Instead, he stood there silently, his posture rigid as he looked into the eyes of my father. There was something haunting in his gaze, an emptiness that seemed to pierce through the darkness. "Please, come in," my father said after a moment, motioning him inside. "It's dangerous out there." The man hesitated, then stepped forward, removing his hood to reveal a pale face with sharp features and eyes that seemed too old, too wise. His presence was cold, sending a chill down my spine even though the fire burned brightly. We offered him a seat by the fire and a blanket to warm himself. He accepted silently, his movements deliberate and slow. My mother, ever the hospitable soul, brought out some warm soup, placing a bowl in front of him without a word. The stranger thanked her with a slight nod, his gratitude as silent as his demeanor. As the night wore on, the storm showed no signs of abating. The wind's wails outside were a constant reminder of the isolation we faced. My father and I found ourselves engrossed in conversation with the stranger, though he spoke little. When he did, his voice was soft, almost melodic, recounting tales of distant lands and ancient forests that seemed almost otherworldly. Despite his calm exterior, there was an undercurrent of sadness that seemed to envelop him, a sorrow that resonated deeply within me. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was searching for something, or someone, lost amidst the endless snow. Around 3 a.m., as the storm reached its peak, the stranger stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. "I must be going," he announced, his voice carrying a weight that made the air feel thick and oppressive. My father rose to escort him to the door, but before we could move, the lights flickered violently and then died, plunging us into complete darkness. Panic set in as the wind howled louder, and the door burst open, snow and ice spilling into the cabin. The stranger was gone, leaving behind an eerie silence that seemed to press down on us. We scrambled to relight the candles, our breaths visible in the cold air. My father and I searched the cabin, but there was no sign of the man. Only the remnants of his brief visit remained, a few melted candles and the lingering scent of winter's chill. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving a serene blanket of snow in its wake. As we ventured outside to assess the damage, we noticed something that sent shivers down our spines. Leading away from the cabin was a trail of blood-red footprints, stark against the pristine white snow. The tracks began at the doorway and disappeared into the dense forest that bordered our property. We followed them with a growing sense of dread, the blood-like stains marking a path deeper into the wilderness. The forest was silent, the usual sounds of wildlife absent, as if nature itself was holding its breath. The footprints led us to a clearing where the snow seemed unnaturally untouched, the ground pristine despite the passage we had made. There, in the center of the clearing, stood a grave, a fresh mound that contrasted sharply with the surrounding landscape. The realization hit me like a freight train. This was the last place the stranger could have gone. We stared in horror as the footprints abruptly ended at the edge of the grave, the blood-like stains converging upon it. A sense of foreboding washed over us. My father approached the grave cautiously, his heart pounding. "This is our home," he whispered, his voice cracking with fear. "Someone's been taken from us." As if on cue, the wind began to howl once more, and the sky darkened with ominous clouds. The temperature plummeted, and we felt an invisible force pressing in on us, making it difficult to breathe. The air was thick with the scent of decay and sorrow, a palpable sadness that seemed to emanate from the very earth. Suddenly, the ground beneath us trembled, and a ghostly apparition began to materialize above the grave. It was the stranger, his figure translucent and shimmering in the dim light. His eyes, once empty, now burned with a fierce intensity, filled with hatred and anguish. "Why did you invite me?" he demanded, his voice echoing through the clearing. "Why did you let me into your lives?" My father stepped forward, trying to reason with the spirit. "We didn't mean any harm. We offered you shelter from the storm." The stranger's gaze shifted to me, and I felt an inexplicable pull, a force drawing me toward him. Memories began to flood my mind, visions of a night long past, of a family much like mine, and a tragedy that had left their home in ruins. It was a story of loss, betrayal, and a desperate plea for mercy that had gone unanswered. "You took what was mine," the apparition whispered, his voice filled with sorrow and rage. "You took my peace." I realized then that the stranger was not just a lost soul seeking refuge, but a harbinger of doom, his presence a curse upon those who dared to offer help without understanding the cost. The footprints of blood were not just his own, but a testament to the lives he had claimed in the name of vengeance. Desperation surged through me as I tried to find a way to appease him, to free both him and my family from this cycle of suffering. "Please," I begged, my voice trembling, "let us make amends. Let us help you find peace." The spirit's form wavered, his anger giving way to a profound sadness. "There is a way," he murmured. "But it requires sacrifice." Before I could respond, the ground split open, and the icy winds tore through the clearing, swirling around us in a frenzied dance. The apparition reached out a spectral hand, his fingers grazing mine with an otherworldly chill. Visions of pain and loss filled my mind, and I felt a connection to the stranger's tormented soul. My father, sensing the gravity of the moment, stepped beside me. Together, we faced the spirit, our hearts united in our desire to end the nightmare. "What must we do?" he asked, his voice steady despite the chaos around us. The apparition paused, his eyes searching ours for the sincerity of our plea. "You must carry my story," he said softly. "Tell the world of the darkness that dwells in the heart of compassion. Only then can my soul find rest, and the curse be lifted." With a surge of determination, I nodded. "I will tell your story. I promise." The spirit's form began to dissolve, his presence fading as a sense of peace settled over the clearing. The ground closed up, and the blood-red footprints vanished, replaced by the pristine snow once more. The storm dissipated, leaving behind a calm silence that felt like a benediction. We returned to our cabin, the weight of the night's events heavy upon us. The experience had changed us, binding our family together in a shared purpose. True to his word, I began to document the story of the stranger in the black cloak, uncovering the tragic tale of a family lost to the unforgiving winter and the sorrow that bound their souls to the land. As the days turned into months, my writings gained attention, shedding light on the forgotten legends of northern Norway. The curse of the stranger began to lift, the apparitions diminishing as more people understood the true cost of unearned compassion. Yet, even now, when the snow falls thick and the winds howl with ancient memories, I can't help but feel the lingering presence of those lost souls. Their stories, like the snowflakes that blanket the earth, are unique yet part of a greater tapestry of sorrow and redemption. And sometimes, late at night, when the storm is at its fiercest, I catch a glimpse of a shadowy figure standing at my window, watching with eyes that hold both gratitude and a warning. It's a reminder that compassion must be tempered with understanding, that sometimes the line between help and harm is as thin as a snowflake in the winter storm. Story number 3. The White Shadow of Winter Hotel. Winter in Russia has a way of seizing your soul, enveloping everything in a silent, icy embrace. The snow falls thick and relentless, turning the world into a monochromatic expanse where shadows dance eerily in the dim light. It was during one such unforgiving winter that I found myself standing before the Winter Hotel, an abandoned relic perched precariously on the outskirts of a forgotten village. I had heard the stories about the Winter Hotel long before I ever considered visiting it. Locals spoke in hushed tones about the ghostly apparitions that roamed its desolate halls, particularly the legend of the woman in white whose presence was said to haunt the third-floor windows. They said that when the snow lay thick on the ground, if you stood by one of those windows, you'd see her, a white shadow with eyes brimming with hatred, staring back at you with an intensity that could freeze your very soul. Curiosity, perhaps tinged with a sense of skepticism, had driven me to this forsaken place. As a freelance writer with a penchant for the macabre, the Winter Hotel presented the perfect setting for my next story. Equipped with my camera, notebook, and a flashlight, I pushed open the creaking gate and stepped onto the property. The building loomed before me, its grandeur eroded by time and neglect. The once opulent facade was now marred by cracked windows and ivy that clawed its way up the sides. The heavy wooden doors, though weathered, stood firm, seemingly daring me to enter. I took a deep breath, the cold air biting at my lungs, and stepped inside. The interior was a ghostly reflection of its past. Faded wallpaper peeled from the walls, revealing layers of grime and neglect. The grand chandelier that once sparkled with crystal brilliance now hung crookedly, its crystals dulled by dust. Each step I took echoed through the empty halls, the sound amplified by the vast, silent spaces. I made my way to the reception area, where the once elegant desk now sat abandoned, papers scattered across its surface as if someone had left in a hurry. My flashlight beam danced across the room, revealing glimpses of forgotten memories, photographs of smiling guests, a brass bell tarnished by years of disuse, and a faded map of the hotel's sprawling layout. Determined to find the elusive third floor, I navigated the maze of corridors, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and excitement. The stairs creaked under my weight, each step a testament to the building's fragile state. As I ascended, the temperature seemed to drop further, a chill that penetrated my very bones. Reaching the third floor, I felt an inexplicable tension in the air. The hallway was narrower, the walls adorned with broken sconces that no longer held candles. My flashlight flickered, casting long, wavering shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. I approached one of the long, narrow windows, the snow outside piled high, obscuring the view beyond. There, in the corner of the window, I saw her, a translucent figure draped in a flowing white gown. Her presence was both beautiful and terrifying, her form wavering like mist in the wind. But it was her eyes that held me captive, deep, dark voids that seemed to harbor centuries of pain and rage. She stared back at me, her gaze piercing through the glass, sending a shiver down my spine. I took a step back, my mind racing to comprehend what I was witnessing. The room around me seemed to grow colder, the silence now broken by the faint sound of footsteps echoing behind me. I spun around, my flashlight cutting through the darkness, but there was nothing, only the empty corridor stretching into shadows. My heart raced as I turned back to the window, finding the woman gone. The oppressive cold remained, and the footsteps continued, now closer, more deliberate. Panic set in as I realized I wasn't alone. I tried to rationalize the experience, telling myself it was just the wind or my imagination playing tricks. But deep down, I knew something far more sinister was at play. I decided it was time to leave, to document my findings and escape the hotel's haunting embrace. As I made my way down the stairs, the footsteps followed, a slow, methodical cadence that matched the pounding of my heart. Each step felt heavier, the air thick with an unseen presence that pressed in on me from all sides. Reaching the ground floor, I hurried toward the exit, my breaths visible in the frigid air. But as I reached the doors, they swung open with a force that sent me stumbling back into the lobby. The chandelier above me swayed violently, sending shards of glass raining down like icy hailstones. The room around me blurred, the lines between reality and nightmare dissolving into a vortex of fear. Desperate to escape, I ran through the halls, the footsteps never faltering, always pursuing. Doors slammed shut behind me, corridors twisted and turned impossibly, leading me in circles through the labyrinthine structure. My mind teetered on the brink of madness, every shadow a threat, every sound a harbinger of doom. Finally, I found myself back at the reception area, the room now transformed into a frozen tableau of the past. The desk was cluttered with old records, and a cold wind blew through the broken windows, carrying whispers of forgotten voices. In the center of the room stood the woman in white, her eyes burning with a malevolent fury that left me paralyzed with fear. "Why are you here?" Her voice was a haunting melody, echoing through the silent hotel. I struggled to find my voice, my throat dry and my mind clouded with terror. I wanted to understand. I managed to stammer, my gaze fixed on her unblinking eyes. She floated toward me, her presence overwhelming. "This place is my prison," she whispered, her voice a sorrowful lament. "Release me." I took a tentative step forward, driven by a mixture of fear and compassion. "How can I help you?" Her form shimmered, and I saw flashes of her past, memories of love, loss, and betrayal that had bound her spirit to the Winter Hotel. "Find the truth," she implored. "Uncover the secrets that bind me here." As she spoke, the room around me began to change, images of the hotel's tragic history playing out like ghostly projections. Fires that consumed entire floors, guests who vanished without a trace, and a heart-wrenching tale of a bride whose wedding was marred by deceit and sorrow. I realized that to free her, I needed to delve deeper into the hotel's dark past, to unearth the stories of those who had suffered within its walls. Determined, I vowed to uncover the truth, to give her the peace she so desperately sought. Days turned into weeks as I researched the Winter Hotel's history, piecing together fragmented accounts and long-forgotten records. I discovered that the hotel had been a beacon of luxury and elegance until a series of unexplained disappearances and tragedies had shattered its reputation. The bride, Elena Ivanova, had been the latest victim, her life cut short on what should have been the happiest day of her life. Armed with this knowledge, I returned to the hotel, determined to confront the lingering spirit and set her free. The snow had finally begun to thaw, the oppressive cold giving way to the promise of spring. But the Winter Hotel remained as haunting as ever, its halls echoing with the whispers of the past. Entering once more, I made my way to the third floor, the memories of my previous encounter fueling my resolve. The corridor was silent, the weight of unspoken sorrow pressing in on me. I approached the window, the spot where I had first seen Elena, and felt her presence once more. "Elena," I called out softly, my voice trembling. "I've come to help you." Her figure materialized, her eyes still filled with hatred and pain. "Why should I trust you?" she demanded, her voice sharp with accusation. "I understand your pain," I replied, holding out a hand in a gesture of peace. "Let me help you find the closure you need." She regarded me for a moment, the anger in her eyes slowly giving way to a flicker of hope. "There's a truth that has been buried," she admitted, her voice wavering. "A betrayal that kept me here." I listened as she recounted the events leading to her untimely death, the deceit of a lover, the fires that consumed the hotel, and the promises made in desperation to save her from eternal torment. Together, we unraveled the layers of history, shedding light on the darkness that had held her spirit captive. As we uncovered the truth, the atmosphere in the hotel began to shift. The oppressive cold lifted, replaced by a warm, gentle breeze that carried with it the scent of blooming flowers. Elena's form grew brighter, her eyes no longer filled with hatred but with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice now a soothing balm. "I can finally rest." With those final words, her spirit dissipated, the once haunted halls now free from the chains of sorrow and vengeance. The Winter Hotel, too, seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, its walls no longer echoing with the ghosts of the past. I left the hotel that day with a sense of accomplishment and peace, knowing that I had played a part in liberating a tormented soul. The stories of the Winter Hotel would no longer be tales of fear but of redemption and the enduring power of truth. Yet, even as I moved forward, the memory of Elena lingered, a reminder of the thin veil that separates the living from the dead, and the profound impact that understanding and compassion can have on the restless spirits that roam our world. Story number 4. The Bride on the Snowy Road. Winter in Vermont was unforgiving. The snow piled high, blanketing the landscape in a thick, unyielding white that seemed to swallow sound and light alike. The roads were treacherous, winding through dense forests where shadows played tricks on the eyes and every crunch of snow under tire echoed ominously in the stillness. It was on one such night, amidst the biting cold and swirling snowflakes, that my life took a turn into the macabre. I was driving home after a late shift at the diner, the kind of shift that leaves you numb and eager to crawl under warm blankets. The road ahead was barely visible, illuminated only by the weak glow of my headlights cutting through the tempestuous storm. My thoughts were scattered, replaying the monotony of the day, when suddenly, through the curtain of white, I saw her, a figure standing by the roadside, her white dress stark against the darkened landscape. Her gown was old-fashioned, reminiscent of another era, with delicate lace trimmings and a long veil that obscured her face. Despite the storm, she stood perfectly still, shivering perhaps from the cold, her presence both haunting and ethereal. My heart skipped a beat. I had heard stories about ghostly apparitions on these roads, but I had never given them much credence until that moment. I pulled over, my headlights revealing more details of her appearance. She was alone, and something about her gaze seemed desperate, pleading even. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something unnatural, but there was nothing, just the empty expanse of snow behind me. "Do you need a ride?" I called out, my voice wavering between skepticism and concern. She nodded silently, stepping onto the cold ground as I opened the passenger door. The chill from outside seeped into the car, and I could see her breath misting in the frigid air. She didn't say a word, just settled into the seat beside me, her presence unsettling yet mesmerizing. As I drove, the road seemed to stretch on endlessly, the snow falling heavier, reducing visibility to mere feet ahead. The only sound was the rhythmic beating of my heart and the soft hum of the engine. I tried to strike up a conversation, but she remained silent, her eyes fixed on the windshield, staring into the storm. After what felt like hours, she finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need to get to the cemetery." The request was simple, yet it sent a shiver down my spine. Cemeteries weren't exactly close by, especially not on such a stormy night. "It's pretty late, and the roads are dangerous. Are you sure you want to go?" She nodded again, her hand reaching out to touch mine. The contact was cold, like touching ice, and a surge of fear coursed through me. Reluctantly, I agreed, turning the car toward the cemetery on the outskirts of town, a place long abandoned and avoided after dark. The drive was tense, the silence between us thick with unspoken fears. Every so often, I glanced at her, trying to discern any emotion behind her masked facade, but her face remained hidden, an enigma wrapped in white. The cemetery loomed ahead, its wrought iron gates creaking in the wind, an invitation to the unknown. As we approached, the storm intensified, the snow now a blinding flurry that made it difficult to see more than a few feet in front of me. I maneuvered the car carefully, the gravel crunching under the tires, until we reached a secluded section where the graves lay untouched by time. I turned off the engine, the car's sudden silence amplifying the eerie atmosphere. She turned to me, her eyes finally visible beneath the veil, empty, hollow, and devoid of life. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice echoing in the stillness. Before I could respond, the temperature inside the car plummeted. My breath became visible, and the air felt thick with an unexplainable dread. I reached for the door handle, intending to let her out, but found it immovable, as if something held it firmly shut. Suddenly, the veil slipped, revealing her face, or what should have been her face. It was twisted, contorted into a grotesque semblance of beauty marred by anguish. Her eyes, voids of darkness, bore into my soul, and a scream echoed from her lips, a soundless, invisible scream that reverberated within my mind. Panic surged through me as I struggled against the door, but it wouldn't budge. The car began to shake violently, the windows frosting over, trapping me inside with this nightmare. The air grew colder, my fingers numb as I fumbled for the keys, desperate to escape. "Please, help me," she cried, her voice now tinged with desperation. "I can't rest." In a final act of terror, the veil tore away completely, and her face was fully revealed, a haunting visage of sorrow and pain. Her mouth opened wide, and an unseen force pulled me into the depths of her despair. The world around me dissolved into darkness, the car vanishing as if swallowed by the storm itself. When I regained consciousness, I was lying on the roadside, the storm having subsided into a gentle snowfall. The car was intact, untouched by the chaos that had ensued moments before. My heart pounded in my chest as I scrambled to my feet, scanning the area for any sign of her. There was nothing, no figure, no footprints, just the pristine snow covering the ground. Confused and shaken, I returned to town, the memory of that night etched into my mind like a scar. Days turned into weeks, and life attempted to return to normal, but the encounter haunted me relentlessly. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been a part of something beyond my understanding, a brush with the supernatural that left me questioning reality itself. Curiosity gnawed at me, driving me to investigate the cemetery where it all happened. The next night, under a moonless sky, I ventured back to the place where the apparition had appeared. The gates were still open, swaying gently in the breeze, and the graves lay silent and undisturbed. As I walked among the tombstones, the cold wrapped around me, and an overwhelming sense of sorrow filled the air. I approached a particular grave, older than the rest, its stone weathered by time. Carved into it were the initials E.B. Emma Bradley, the name I found in old town records as a bride who had tragically perished in a car accident on that very road decades ago. Realization dawned on me, the woman I had encountered was Emma, her spirit forever bound to the place where her life had been cut short. My encounter was a restless soul seeking closure, a desperate plea for peace that transcended the boundaries of life and death. With newfound understanding, I knelt beside the grave, offering a silent apology for disturbing her eternal vigil. "I'm sorry," I whispered, the weight of her sorrow pressing down on me. "I didn't mean to frighten you." A gentle breeze rustled the leaves, and for a moment, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. The oppressive cold lifted, replaced by a warmth that spoke of forgiveness and release. The spirit of Emma Bradley seemed to find solace, her presence fading into the night, leaving behind a lingering sense of peace. Driving away from the cemetery that night, the snow no longer felt menacing but serene, each flake a testament to the quiet resolution of a tormented soul. The roads, though still treacherous, no longer held the same fear for me, for I had faced the unknown and found compassion amidst the shadows. Yet, sometimes, when the winter storms are at their fiercest, I catch a glimpse of white in the rearview mirror, a fleeting shadow, a reminder of the night I met the bride on the snowy road, and the enduring power of empathy that bridges the living and the dead. Story number 5. The Last Bus. Snow blanketed the winding mountain roads of northern China, turning the familiar path into an unrecognizable expanse of white. It was the kind of winter that seemed to freeze time itself, each flake adding to the silent, oppressive stillness that enveloped the landscape. I had always been fascinated by the stories locals whispered about the last bus, a midnight route that few dared to take and even fewer returned from. My name is Li Wei, and I was never one to shy away from a challenge. As the night grew colder and the shadows deeper, I found myself standing at the bus stop, waiting for the last departure. The village behind me was snug and warm, its lights flickering like distant stars against the vast darkness. Ahead, the road disappeared into the mountains, where legends said the spirits of the lost lingered. The bus arrived with a shudder, its engine coughing like an old man struggling to rise. The driver, a stooped figure with hollow eyes, greeted me with a nod. There were 3 seats occupied, 2 at the back and 1 beside me. As I settled in, the warmth inside contrasted sharply with the biting cold outside. The bus rattled to life, headlights piercing the night as we began our ascent. I glanced at the 2 passengers seated at the rear. They were silent, their faces obscured by the shadows. Something about them felt off, but I couldn't quite place it. As the bus climbed higher, the air grew thinner, and an unnatural stillness settled over the vehicle. My breath formed visible puffs in the frigid air, but the 2 passengers behind me showed no signs of exhaling. Their chests remained unnaturally still, eyes vacant and staring into the void beyond the window. A chill ran down my spine. I tried to dismiss it as mere imagination, a trick of the mind fueled by the eerie silence. But as minutes turned into hours, the bus seemed to enter a realm outside of time. The road twisted and turned, but the scenery remained unchanged, endless snow, unyielding and suffocating. Suddenly, the bus lurched violently, throwing me against my seat. The lights flickered, casting grotesque shadows that danced along the walls. The driver's knuckles whitened as he gripped the steering wheel, muttering something I couldn't understand. Panic set in as I realized we were no longer on any recognizable path. The mountains seemed to close in around us, the snow now swirling in unnatural patterns outside the windows. I turned back to the rear seats, trying to make sense of the passengers' lifeless gazes. Their presence felt like a heavy weight, pressing down on my chest and making it hard to breathe. The temperature inside the bus plummeted further, frost forming on the glass and the metal surfaces. My fingers tingled, numb from the cold, as I reached for my phone to call for help. But there was no signal, only static and the distant howling of the wind. The driver glanced at me, his eyes now visible and filled with an inexplicable fear. "We're not on the road anymore," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the creaking of the bus. "Something's wrong." Before I could respond, the bus began to descend rapidly, the road spiraling downward into darkness. I held onto the seat, heart pounding as the scenery blurred past in a whiteout. The sound of rushing wind filled the cabin, drowning out any other noise. It felt like we were plummeting into an abyss, the bus teetering on the edge of oblivion. A blinding flash of light engulfed us, and for a moment, everything was silent. When my senses returned, I found myself lying on the cold ground beside the bus, the vehicle having crashed violently into a ravine. The world was eerily quiet, the only sound the distant drip of melting snow. I tried to move, but my body felt heavy, as if anchored to the spot. Groaning, I pushed myself upright and looked around. The bus was a mangled wreck, steam rising from its twisted metal. But the most unsettling part was the absence of the 2 passengers who had been with me. Only 3 bodies were found, the driver, myself, and the 3rd passenger beside me. The 2 at the back had vanished without a trace, leaving no marks or signs of their existence. Days later, the story of our disappearance spread through the village, adding another chapter to the haunted legacy of the last bus. Some said we had been claimed by the mountain spirits, lost souls who never found their way home. Others believed the bus had crossed into a different dimension, a liminal space where time and reality twisted into nightmares. I returned to my life, but the memories lingered like shadows in the corners of my mind. On cold winter nights, I sometimes dreamt of the silent passengers, their empty eyes watching me from the darkness. The bus route was officially closed, deemed too dangerous to operate, but whispers persisted among the villagers. They spoke of seeing the bus on moonless nights, its headlights piercing the darkness as it ventured into the heart of the mountains, never to return. One evening, years later, driven by a mix of skepticism and unresolved fear, I found myself at the same bus stop. The snow was falling heavily, blanketing the world in white. My phone still had no signal, and the air was thick with the same oppressive silence. As the clock struck midnight, a bus emerged from the shadows, its engine groaning like an old memory. I took a deep breath and approached, the legend swirling in my mind. The driver greeted me with a nod, his eyes devoid of recognition. I hesitated, heart pounding, before stepping inside. The seats were familiar, the same worn fabric and creaking wood. I chose a seat beside myself, the ghostly remnants of my past now an unspoken presence. As the bus began to move, I glanced at the rear seats, half expecting to see the lifeless passengers staring back at me. But they were gone, as if never there. The road twisted and turned, the scenery a blur of white and darkness. The temperature dropped, and I felt the same unnatural stillness enveloping the vehicle. The driver glanced in the mirror, meeting my eyes with a haunting emptiness. "Welcome back," he whispered, and the realization hit me like a frostbite. Some journeys never truly end, and some spirits never find their way home. The last bus continued its eternal route, a ghostly echo on the mountain roads, forever carrying those who dare to seek the truth into the abyss of the unknown. Story number 6. The Abandoned House on Snowy Hill. The wind howled through the small Canadian village of Frost Vale, carrying with it whispers of old legends and forgotten fears. Nestled at the edge of town, where the dense pine forest gave way to a vast expanse of untouched snow, stood the decrepit house on Snowy Hill. To the locals, it was more than just an abandoned structure. It was a repository of eerie tales and unspoken dread. I grew up hearing stories about that house. As a kid, my friends and I dared each other to get a glimpse of the spectral child rumored to haunt its windows when the snow lay thick on the ground. They said if the snow was deep enough to cover every path and trail, you could see a pale-faced child standing silently at the second-story window, watching with empty, sorrowful eyes. Most dismissed these tales as mere folklore, but as I grew older, curiosity gnawed at me, pushing me to seek the truth behind the legends. One frigid December evening, with the village blanketed in a pristine layer of snow, my friends and I decided it was time to uncover the mystery of the abandoned house. We were 6 in total: Jake, the skeptic; Laura, the storyteller; Mike, the prankster; Sarah, the quiet observer; Tom, the history buff; and me, Ethan, the reluctant leader. Armed with flashlights, cameras, and a sense of bravado that only youth can muster, we set out under the pale glow of the full moon. The journey to Snowy Hill was arduous. The snow crunched under our boots, and the biting cold seeped through our layers of clothing, making each step a struggle. The trees loomed like silent sentinels, their branches heavy with snow, creating an almost otherworldly atmosphere. As we approached the house, its silhouette became more defined against the night sky, a 2-story wooden structure with broken windows and a sagging roof, exuding an aura of abandonment and decay. "Are we really doing this?" Jake asked, his voice wavering despite his attempts to sound confident. "Of course we are," I replied, trying to mask my own apprehension. "It's just an old house. There's nothing here but time and a lot of snow." We reached the front yard, where the snow had piled up unevenly, obscuring the walkway. The house's front door stood slightly ajar, creaking softly with each gust of wind. Jake pushed it open further, and we stepped inside, the door groaning ominously behind us. The interior was shrouded in darkness, the only light emanating from our flashlights cutting through the gloom. The air inside was thick with the scent of mildew and something else, something metallic and cold. We moved cautiously through the main hall, our footsteps muffled by the thick carpet, now tattered and moth-eaten. The wallpaper, once vibrant, was peeling away, revealing the bare, cracked plaster beneath. Dust particles danced in the beam of our lights, adding to the eerie silence that enveloped us. "Let's split up," Tom suggested, always the practical one. "We'll cover more ground that way." Reluctantly, we agreed. Laura and Mike took the left wing of the house, Sarah and Jake the right, while Tom and I stayed near the main hall, planning to reconvene after a thorough search. Minutes passed, and the house seemed to come alive with every creak and groan of its old wooden frame. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the left wing, followed by Sarah's terrified scream from the right. My heart pounded as I rushed to join Tom, only to find him standing frozen, staring at an old, cracked mirror on the wall. "What's wrong?" I demanded, grabbing his shoulder. He turned to me, eyes wide with fear. "Look." In the mirror, our reflections were distorted, our faces pale and eyes hollow. But behind us, in the reflection, was the faint image of a child standing at the foot of the stairs, staring intently at us with empty eyes. Before I could react, the image vanished, replaced by our normal reflections once more. "Did you see that?" I whispered, unable to shake the feeling that we were being watched. Before Tom could answer, a sudden chill swept through the room, and the sound of scratching echoed from the walls. It was the unmistakable sound of nails scraping against wood, growing louder and more frantic. Panic set in as we realized we weren't alone. "Let's get out of here," I urged, pulling Tom toward the exit. But the hallway seemed to stretch endlessly, the door we had entered through now seemingly miles away. The scratching intensified, surrounding us from all sides, and the temperature plummeted, our breaths visible in the freezing air. In a desperate attempt to escape, we bolted down the stairs, the sound of cold breathing right behind us. The front door was still out of reach, and the house seemed intent on trapping us within its decaying walls. As we reached the base of the stairs, a shadowy figure materialized before us, a child, no taller than 3 feet, with a ghostly white face and empty black eyes that seemed to pierce through our very souls. "Leave," the apparition whispered, its voice barely audible over the cacophony of scratching and breathing. We froze, the terror rendering us momentarily immobile. The child's presence was suffocating, its sorrow palpable. I felt an inexplicable urge to reach out, to offer comfort, but fear held me back. Suddenly, the house seemed to react, walls closing in, the air thickening with despair. "Run!" I screamed, breaking free from my paralysis. We sprinted toward the front door, the child's voice echoing in our minds, a haunting plea that left us with a lingering sense of loss and sorrow. Bursting through the door, we didn't stop until we were miles away, the house on Snowy Hill shrinking into the distance, swallowed by the endless snowfall. Gasping for breath, we huddled together, the reality of what we had experienced sinking in. In the days that followed, the story of our night in the abandoned house spread through Frost Vale, adding another layer to the village's rich tapestry of legends. I couldn't shake the image of the child's hollow eyes and the overwhelming sense of sadness that permeated the house. Determined to understand, Tom delved into the town's history, uncovering a tragic tale of loss and unfulfilled promises. Decades ago, the house had been home to the Thompson family. One bitter winter night, a fire had engulfed the home, claiming the lives of the parents and their young daughter, Emily. The village mourned, but whispers soon turned to rumors of Emily's restless spirit, forever seeking solace and reunion with her lost family. The heavy snowfall was seen as a veil, hiding the sorrow that lingered within the walls of the abandoned house. Armed with this knowledge, we returned to Snowy Hill the following winter, when the snow lay deepest, covering every trace of our previous visit. This time, we were prepared, not just with flashlights and cameras, but with a sense of empathy and a desire to help. As night fell and the snow blanketed the landscape, we approached the house with reverence. Entering once more, the cold greeted us like an old friend, and the oppressive silence was broken only by our footsteps. We gathered in the main hall, the air heavy with unspoken emotions. Tom began to speak, recounting the tragic history and acknowledging Emily's lingering presence. "We're here to help you find peace," he said softly. "We understand your pain, and we want to honor your memory." As if responding to our words, the atmosphere shifted. The scratching ceased, and the temperature began to rise. The mirror that had shown us distorted reflections now displayed a clear image of Emily, her face still pale but her eyes now shimmering with a hint of hope. One by one, we felt the weight lift, the sorrow transforming into a sense of release. Emily's spirit approached us, her presence no longer menacing but gentle. She extended a hand, and I reached out, feeling a warmth that contrasted sharply with the winter chill. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. "You have given me peace." With those final words, Emily faded, her spirit finally at rest. The house, once a beacon of fear and sorrow, now stood silent and serene, the heavy burden of its past lifted by our understanding and compassion. As we left Snowy Hill that night, the snow continued to fall, but it no longer felt oppressive. Instead, it was a blanket of purity, covering the remnants of pain and replacing them with tranquility. The abandoned house remained, but its haunting presence had transformed into a reminder of the power of empathy and the enduring spirit of those we seek to understand. Back in Frost Vale, the story of our second visit became a new legend, one of redemption and closure. And though the house on Snowy Hill still stood as a testament to the past, it was no longer a place of fear, but a symbol of the healing that comes when we confront our darkest fears with courage and compassion. Story number 7. Whispers in the Snowy Forest. The sun was sinking behind the snow-capped peaks, casting long shadows across the silent expanse of the Japanese mountains. I had always been drawn to the solitude of the wilderness, the way it stripped life down to its most primal elements. This particular winter felt harsher than usual, the biting cold seeping into my bones as I ventured deeper into the forest with my rifle slung over my shoulder. I had come to this remote region to hunt, seeking solace from the chaos of city life. The dense pine trees stood tall and indifferent, their branches heavy with fresh snow that crunched beneath my boots with each cautious step. The only sounds were the whispering winds and the occasional distant call of a wild animal. But as twilight approached, an eerie stillness settled over the woods, broken only by a faint, sorrowful sound that seemed to drift through the trees. At first, I dismissed it as the wind playing tricks on my mind. But the sound grew louder, unmistakably human, a soft, mournful crying that tugged at something deep within me. Curiosity overcame my unease, and I followed the sound, navigating through the thick underbrush. The forest seemed to close in around me, the shadows growing longer and darker as night fully embraced the landscape. The crying led me to a clearing blanketed in pristine white snow, illuminated by the pale light of the moon. I scanned the area, expecting to find someone in distress, but there were no footprints or signs of struggle, nothing but the untouched snow stretching endlessly in every direction. My heart pounded in my chest as I turned to leave, but the forest had other plans. The mournful cry transformed into a chilling, maniacal laugh that echoed through the trees. My blood ran cold as a figure materialized before me, a woman dressed in a flowing white kimono, her long hair cascading down her back like a silken waterfall. Her eyes were black and hollow, voids that seemed to swallow the light around them. She moved with an unnatural grace, each step deliberate and silent, yet her presence radiated a palpable sense of dread. "Who are you?" I managed to stammer, my voice barely more than a whisper. She didn't answer. Instead, she continued to approach, her gaze never leaving mine. I felt an invisible force pressing down on me, making it difficult to breathe. Panic surged through me as I realized I was trapped, unable to move or escape the impending terror. A sudden clap of thunder split the night, shaking the very ground beneath my feet. Lightning flashed, illuminating the clearing in stark, fleeting bursts of light. In that brief illumination, the woman's face contorted into a grotesque mask of agony and fury before vanishing as quickly as she had appeared. The laughter lingered, fading into the distance, leaving me alone once more in the oppressive darkness. I stumbled backward, my mind racing to make sense of what I had just witnessed. The forest seemed alive with unseen eyes watching my every move. Determined to find my way back, I pressed forward, the oppressive silence now punctuated by the faint echoes of the woman's laughter. Each step felt heavier than the last, the weight of fear anchoring me to the spot. Hours passed in what felt like an eternity. My legs ached, and my breath came in ragged gasps, each inhale a struggle against the frigid air. Just when I thought I couldn't go on any longer, a flicker of light appeared through the trees, a faint glow that seemed both inviting and otherworldly. Hope surged within me, and I quickened my pace toward the beacon. As I drew closer, the light resolved into a small, rustic cabin nestled among the trees. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, and the warm glow from the windows promised refuge from the relentless cold. I reached the door and pounded on it, desperation lending strength to my movements. After a moment, the door creaked open, revealing an elderly man with a kind, weathered face. "Please, let me in," I gasped, collapsing into the warmth of the cabin. The man ushered me inside without hesitation, his eyes reflecting a deep understanding of my plight. I recounted my ordeal, describing the haunting presence and the unnerving laughter that had followed me through the forest. The man's expression grew somber as he listened, nodding slowly. "You're not the first to encounter her," he said quietly. "Legends speak of a spirit trapped between this world and the next, searching for something she lost in her final moments of life. They say she lures travelers into the forest, unable to find peace until her purpose is fulfilled." A shiver ran down my spine. "Is there a way to help her? To escape this place?" The old man handed me a steaming mug of tea, his hand steady despite his age. "There is a ritual, but it's not without risk. It requires confronting the spirit and offering her something of significance. Only then can she move on, and the forest will release you." I nodded, steeling myself for what lay ahead. As the night wore on, he explained the steps of the ritual, each one more daunting than the last. With a mixture of fear and determination, I prepared myself to face the spirit once more, hoping to find a way out of the nightmare that had enveloped me. The next morning, the first light of dawn broke through the trees, casting a pale glow over the snow-covered landscape. I set out with a newfound purpose, the instructions etched into my mind. The forest, still silent and foreboding, seemed to hold its breath as I navigated toward the clearing where I had first encountered the spirit. As I approached, the air grew colder, and the oppressive silence returned. Summoning every ounce of courage, I began the ritual, speaking the ancient words and offering a token of my own, a locket containing a picture of my family, something I held dear. The act felt both sacred and terrifying, a bridge between the living and the dead. The atmosphere thickened, and the temperature plummeted. The woman's presence was palpable, her sorrow and longing filling the air around me. I felt her energy pressing in, a desperate need for release that mirrored my own desire for freedom. Then, as if drawn by my offering, she appeared once more, her figure more defined, her eyes still hollow but now reflecting a glimmer of hope. I continued the ritual, my voice steady despite the fear gnawing at my insides. The forest seemed to respond, the wind stilling and the shadows receding as the first rays of sunlight pierced the canopy. A sense of calm washed over me as the spirit reached out, her touch gentle and fleeting. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice no longer a haunting echo but a sincere expression of gratitude. Slowly, her form began to dissolve, the chains binding her to this world finally breaking. As she vanished, the forest around me transformed. The oppressive darkness lifted, replaced by the serene beauty of the morning. The path back home was clear, the way illuminated by the warmth of the rising sun. I walked with a lightness in my step, the memory of the encounter etched into my mind as a testament to the thin veil between the living and the dead. Weeks later, back in the safety of my home, I often found myself gazing out the window at the snow-covered mountains, a sense of peace settling over me. The experience had changed me, deepening my appreciation for the delicate balance of life and the mysteries that lie beyond. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, I could almost hear the faint echo of her gratitude carried on the wind, a reminder that even in the darkest places, there is hope for redemption and release.